First of all, what is Web API? How does it fit in? We're going to talk about HTTP APIs in general. Then we've got a few demos. One is file new project and kind of look at what Web API does. And then we have a look at using so Mark built out in the last session a single page application front end. So you had Ember, and it was making these calls, and magically data was appearing on the screen. Well, where was that data coming from? And the answer is Ember was making a call, an AJAX call, back into a Web API backend. So we'll look at that specific code and how the two of those work together. And then, and this is a really important concept, an important thing to take away, is that Web API and HTTP APIs in general are more than just for web applications. So of course, the scenario where you have JavaScript in a web page that wants to call back into a service and get some data, that's a great use of HTTP services. But you can use HTTP services for a variety of other client applications. So we're actually going to look at a few of those. We'll have a few surprises there. Keep you on your toes. Okay, so first of all, how does Web API fit in? So here I've kind of broken up, we've got the common ASP.NET Core running underneath. And this has things like security and caching and kind of, your basic kind of core level services. On top of this, I've split this up into two sections. So we've got this green block on the left and a gray block on the right. The green block on the left supplies HTML, and HTML is really built for browsers, right? So people are familiar with using browsers. They look at HTML, they post their form data back and buy things, and that goes back through browsers, HTML form post, et cetera, right? So all those things on the left side are mostly geared towards HTML. And it's true, you can write JSON or XML or other things. You can create those using MVC or even web forms or web pages, but it's not really what they were built for. So there are a lot of things where you'll run into problems or limitations. You'll have to work around things. So if you want to create XML or JSON, those are things that are commonly not used by people, but robots love them, right? The computers love to read and write XML and JSON. And so it's kind of this split. So you're free to use whatever you'd like. I talk to some people and they say, we've got our own in-house system for doing, creating JSON data using MVC. And I say, right on, brother. But what we recommend, the easiest path is, if you want to create HTTP services using JSON or XML, Web API is a better fit for that. We'll talk about some of the reasons why right now. One is, I want to define some terms. There's kind of a distinction between REST and HTTP. And you might have heard Microsoft kind of pushing things like WCF REST or REST, the Web API is great for RESTful services, and it is. But REST is this whole idea of representational state transfer. And it's kind of a little bit of an academic thing, but it really can be useful. The idea is that we're modeling modeling resources. And so these resources are things on the server like I have a catalog, and that catalog has products, and we use relations to navigate through them, and that the URLs and the verbs associated have a lot of meaning. So instead of, it's really easy to build out services where you're kind of thinking more RPC, remote procedure call, call a method and get something back. The idea with REST is a lot more kind of prescriptive in you're navigating through resources. But I want to make the distinction here that HTTP services can use REST, and Web API is designed to make it really easy to use REST if you would like to, but it's not a requirement. So it's not, like these two are, I'm not teaching you how to build a REST application now. Hypermedia is that thing I was starting to talk about, and that's the idea of links. So if you have links within your resources, they define, the idea is that I should be able to navigate to the top level of an API, and it's going to give me back some information, and it's going to give me some links inside of it that are going to tell me how to navigate down to other parts of the API, right? And so I should be able to traverse that, and without any documentation, I should be able to kind of figure out what's going on. I really like the idea of this. In practice, there aren't a whole lot of people that are really following this through. But this is kind of a goal, and I think it's a good thing to kind of work towards. API design in general is an important thing, and I think a lot of the time people don't think about this. So I'm going to show you just scaffolded controllers, and they're good. So these are, it's the CRUD operations, right? Create, read, update, delete. And that's a good start, but really thinking through your API is important. So if you have an API that's for your application, you should think of this as, this is your interface for however many people are connecting to you. And finally, HTTP status codes are important as well in Web API and API services in general. So this is the idea that instead of creating all your own custom error codes and response messages, I know I've done this before, I'm guessing some of you have too. When you create an API, then you say, well, this wasn't found, and this was an error, and it's my own status code 482, because that's what I thought of right now and stuff. Instead, with HTTP APIs, we really want to take advantage of HTTP status codes. And it turns out there are a lot of them, and they really cover most cases. So you'll see in Web API that we take a lot of advantage of those. And really part of the idea with those HTTP status codes and leveraging verbs and all that is to avoid reinventing the wheel. So when we create these HTTP services, it's very easy to take a look at it and kind of guess know what you should expect from it, right? So we'll talk specifically about Web API. Okay, so I have a few slides here, and then we just jump into the code. So you can tell I'm anxious to just jump into the code. But so here's the general idea. Is if we have I have to use this at least once in the day. So we still, just like in MVC, we have a model, right? So this is a standard class with some properties on it. And then our controller is just like an MVC controller, except instead of inheriting from controller-based class, we have an API controller. And it's very similar to MVC controller, except it does something slightly different. For instance, it's a lot more focused on things like content negotiation, something we'll look at in a minute, stuff like that. So this is I'm doing a quick 4-step look at an API controller. So here I've created a list, and I'm initializing the controller with a list of persons, and we don't care where they came from. So now, in order to get things from that, this is pretty much exactly the same kind of API surface that you would see from an MVC controller. So get is going to return all the people. So this would be like a list view or an index view on an MVC application. Now here's a really key thing. This get method is an HTTP verb. And you'll see this in Web API that since we're depending on HTTP verbs and HTTP verbs have meaning, by default, you don't have to go through and come up with names. You can create other names for your controller actions, but you're going to see get, put, post, delete, those kinds of things. Those are automatically mapped in. So if you browse to this API URL and you use a get HTTP verb, how many people here have no idea what an HTTP verb is? Okay, so in general, an HTTP verb is our way, the browser's way, or anyone's way when you're talking HTTP of saying, here's my intention. So a URL is a place to go, but then what do we want to do? Do we want to post something to it or just get some information from it, right? So since those verbs are there, we don't have to create all those method names. We can just say get verb maps to the get method action, okay? And then here, if you want to just get one, we pass in one ID, an ID number, and we get back one person. All right? I think it's time for some code. So I've got Visual Studio. I'm creating a new project. In this case, I'm going to create an API, a Web API class. Now remember, you can add in Web API to any of these 1ASP.NET projects. The reason I'm using Web API in this case is because it adds in a help page. And the help page is kind of useful for navigating around and exploring the API. You can delete it. You can also add in that help page into any other kind of web API application. But this is easy, right? Again, pay attention to this. This README is optimized for what you'll find in web API. So, we actually put a lot of work into making these READMEs not just throw away annoying stuff. These are things that will tell you stuff about how you should set up your web API applications. With that out of the way, we will close it. All right, so let's look at the default one that's created here. So I have a get method, and it returns a list of string. So this is very simple. This is our model is being created inline, and it's an array of strings, right? And then if we want to get one of them, we just do get ID and return a value. And you can see up here, this is slightly different than what we looked at before. All these web API routes start with API. So let's look at why that is. If I go to web API config, and try and rename it, and then open it the right way, you'll see that this is defined in the route. So this is a standard thing in your routes. You can prefix something, and in this case, the default web API route starts everything with /API. So if anything starts with API, we route it towards that controller, that web API controller. Any questions so far? How about let's just run this and see what it looks like. So I'm going to do that. I'm opening it up. Actually, let me not do that. Because what I want to do first is I want to add in a handy debugger thing. So this is a NuGet package, so I'm going to right-click on References. I'll say Manage NuGet Packages, and I'm going to bring in something called Web API Test Client. This is written by a dev. It's not an installed package. I always do that. Okay, this is written by a dev on the Web API team. And what it does is, into the help page, it also adds kind of an interactive debugger thing. Wow, my internet is not happening. Let me make sure I'm on. I was earlier. Make sure. Ha ha ha.
1 sec, you're going to need that.
I sure will. Just a second. Oh, I don't think this is today's, is it?
That's today's.
All right.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Should be, hopefully.
Woo, secret password.
Hello, can you tell us why the default index value is 5, not 4, not 6?
I have no idea. Good question. I've wondered that myself. All right, online. There we go. Good thing someone told me to check that. Okay, so what this is doing again is file new project, web API will create a site that has a nice help page. And then this goes a little step further. It modifies it to add in an interactive debugger. So inside my web application, I can go through and test the URLs, okay? So again, this is a combined application. It's an MVC and web API. So if I click on API, here it's going and it's created this help page, okay? Now this help page is, may look like it's, not that smart, but it's actually quite brilliant. It is reflecting over my API controllers, and it's figuring out at runtime what they can do. So in this one, right, I have this, my get API values, and this tells me this is what I can expect back from it, is an array of strings. So an example, if I request application JSON, I'm going to get back strings like that, or if I request application XML, I'm going to get back a single one. Okay? Before we play with this more, I want to go in and add a model and scaffold out a controller. And we'll see that this is the same basic way of building things that we use in MVC, and that's not an accident, obviously. This is something that the team did to make it easy so you can move back and forth. All right. So now I'll say prop int ID and prop string name. All right. So there I've got a model, and now I'm going to scaffold out a web API controller, and I'm doing it the exact same way that I did before. So instead of MVC5 controller, I'm going to say a Web API 2 controller with actions using Entity Framework. So again, all the same things. This was a person controller, so I can use async or not. I guess this time I'm not going to, just maybe make it a little easier. And okay, and we'll call this, I don't know, person. All right, so now this time it's doing the same old scaffolding, except it's only creating one file, right? There's no views in Web API, and this is a key difference. There's no views because all the controller does is return data that's serialized in the data format that the client requested. So there's this thing called content negotiation, and this has been around forever. Your browser does it every time you browse to a website. It does it multiple times because of all the image and JavaScript and all these requests. Your browser says, I prefer XML data, and I can deal with JSON data, and please don't give me binary, or whatever, right? So it gives a kind of ordered rank of different media types that it can accept. And then the server says, well, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this, and I'm going to give you your top requests today. You're a winner. So that content negotiation is figured out. Web API handles that, and it negotiates out that content, and then it says, and it handles the serialization for you. And you can plug in, if you've got your own serialization format that you need, something custom, or say BSON data, which is binary, JSON, or binary. It's a compact because it's binary form, and it's so that's something that's being added for Web API 2, but it's actually people have been doing it just by creating their own media formatters. Long story short, here's our controller, and when I call get people, it does return people, and all it has to do is return that value, and there's no view. Make sense? Any questions? All right, so now I'm going to run that again, and what we'll see when we go to the Web API help page is we're going to still see our values controller. That API is still there, but we're going to also see that it's inspected this new controller that we've created, and it's got a person help page for us. So again, I recommend using this as you're getting familiar with Web API, because this helps you explore it and see what you're going to expect to get back. So if I say get, this get is going to return a list of people, and it shows my ID and my name. And if I like XML, then I'm crazy, but here it is. There's that XML, okay? So this is designed for, make it so you can explore through an API and understand it. It's also, some people are using it. It's actually, a lot of web APIs you'll find are not very well documented. And if they're documented, it's done once and they're not maintained. So people go in and add a lot of things to the API, and you'll find that the API is out of date. And I've talked to a lot of people that do, focus on API design, and they say everybody just does it manually. Well, this is nice because this is actually generating real, valid, useful API documentation, and it's done like it just happened right now, right? So that's kind of handy. So now let's go in.
John, does it support, it says no documentation available under description. Does it support the idea of the XML comments in order to pull information?
Yeah, so you can do that. And what they're doing now, I just saw a preview of it yesterday, which is coming out very soon in an update, is they're adding in a lot of things too where you can use attributes. So you can put in a lot more, and it allows for like navigating through sub-documents and all kinds of things. So, yep. Okay, so I'm going to look at this post person, and this shows me, I should expect to post in a person, and this is the body format I need to post in. So let's click on this test API, and here I'm going to send in, I don't need to pass in an ID. That's going to be automatically assigned, right? It's a primary key. But I do need to pass in a name, so I'll pass in Holly White. Okay, and we'll say send. So that's going to, actually I have to click the button, I guess. There it is. So it created it, and now it's returning to me some important information. It returned a 201 created. So again, we're going back to the thing that HTTP verbs are important. And so we don't need to define a lot of ways to say, yes, I created it or whatever. All we do is return a 201 and we're done. That says this item was created. How many people here knew that an HTTP 201 meant created? Right, a few nods, right? Some people showing off a little bit, but good, 404. But yeah, okay. So how about a 418? Does anyone know what a 418 is? I'm a teapot. Well done. You win today. It's actually true. It's in the RFC. Okay, so we created somebody, and what's returned is HTTP 201, and the body tells us, here's the information, and here's my ID. Okay? So let's create another one. Am I zoomed in or something? Control minus. All right. So we will create one more. I will go in here and I'll say, let's add in, all right, one more person, and we'll say send, 201, all right, and just one more. Okay, so now we've created, what's that? Okay, so now we've created, 3 people. So now let's take a look at how we could get those back, get our list of people. All right, so if I go to my help page home, and if I look at get API person, this is how I would expect to get that list, right? So I can click on this, and I'll say get, and there I got my 3 people back, right? So I got a 200 OK. So actually I have a good friend that started a company recently called RunScope, and their focus is completely on APIs, and their shirts say, RunScope, everything is going to be 200 OK. So I just laugh every time I see that. But and then here I also got back the body, and this body is in JSON format. All right, so JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, is a very lightweight format, and it's actually because JavaScript objects are by nature just, what is it called, an array? I mean, it's an object array. So we're able to just return an ID, and then you just do colons for the property things, right? So that's neat, but I decided I really prefer XML. So let's take advantage of this whole content negotiation thing. I'm going to use an accept header, and I'm going to say accept application XML. So now I've told it I prefer to get XML, please. So now I hit send, and it returns me that same data back, but now it's in XML format. Make sense? So I'm showing you this in a browser because it's really easy to do and to play around with it. But of course, the important thing is that this works anywhere. This is an API that can be leveraged from anywhere. So if I go in to command line, I should be able to curl for it and find that information out, right? So let's do just a tiny bit of that. If I go in here, so I'll say curl, and I'm actually in the PowerShell window, but curl is an alias for invoke HTTP request. So if I say curl that, and then I need to get the right API, which is /API/person. And I don't need to specify get. That's going to be the default. So right, I just went in and made that call, and you can see here's that JSON data. Let's not do that meeting right now. I have a good excuse. So here's our JSON data that came back. And let's say we prefer XML data. So I can actually, in here, I can say /headers, and then I can pass in accept equals application XML. And I think that should work. Right, so there I got that same data back, and this time it's in XML format. So the reason I'm showing you this with curl is, not to try and type as fast as Mark. It's really because, I wish I could, it's really more to show you that this is not just about web browser. This is, we're calling into a server, we're specifying what we want and the format we would prefer, and it's returning us that information, okay? So with that in mind, we've looked at building that back-end service. We're going to apply it 3 different times. First, we're going to look at building this into the single-page application. So the front end for, so here it is, Web API backend. There we go. So remember again, we had that Angular or that Ember front end, and I'll show you that again just to remind you. So this was what Mark built out earlier, and so we had all this stuff where it was calling in, and remember all these things here where it's got get and post to /API/trivia. All right. So like here, this API trivia. So it's get JSON. And so that's a neat thing. Again, once you start looking for these things, it's everywhere. And here, this content negotiation, when jQuery has this built in, where if you say get JSON, it's actually going to make an XML HTTP request, and it's going to set the header that says accept JSON. So now, what happens there? We need to have that API controller somewhere. So again, leveraging the fact that we've got these conventions, controllers go in the controller folder. Now if I click on this trivia controller, of course, there it is. And so we're looking for a get method. And there's our get method. So when we say we want a trivia question, this is what happens. So first of all, it's going to, we still have, again, all of our kind of standard things. In general, we've got all the standard things you'd expect in ASP.NET. So we've got user.identity.name. So this is the same kind of identity system you'd use in an MVC request or whatever. So the reason we're tracking the identity is because we don't want to show the same user the same question over and over. So we're actually tracking in the database every time we ask a person a question, and then we go get them the next question. So multiple people can take this quiz, and they go through the questions in order. So now we're saying get the trivia question from a question service. And this is actually a really key thing. A lot of times it's tempting when you dig through, in any new programming language or framework or whatever, you kind of, the question I always ask is, where does the code go? I dig around and I find like, oh, it's the controller. This is where my code goes. And then it's easy to write these really long controllers. And that's not a good idea. Really what you want to do is abstract things away. So you may want to, there's a lot of different places where that code can go. There's things like filters and message handlers and stuff like that. But a very simple place to start is if you've got a call into if you've got something like this, it's easy to kind of pull out. We've got a question service, and all this question service does is get a question. So it's an async thing, and it just says, give me the user's ID, and I'll return you the next question. All right? So then that's really all this thing does, is it goes through, it gets it, and it returns a question. And here, this returns an HTTP response exception, and it says not found. And there's actually a newer thing in Web API 2 that we could use here, which is a kind of a shorthand for saying the same thing, not found. Does this make sense? Okay, so I mean, I know it's a lot to throw at you, but the idea is Ember making an AJAX call saying, please give me JSON. It maps in here because of the standard thing where it's a GET request to the trivia controller. And so those conventions map it in here using routing. And then this says, I've got your user ID. Get me the next question. So it calls off to this user service that queries the database. And then it just returns that question. And remember that question, the format of that is a trivia question. Right? So it's got an ID, title, and a list of options. But we don't have to worry about that. Web API handles serializing that out. All right? So, I mean, I can run this, but it's what you've seen before when Mark was showing you. We click the button. Actually, let me set a breakpoint on that. And we can kind of step through at least. So here it's got my username. I've logged into this before. Then it goes in here and it does this query. It gets the next question. So here actually it's async. It's getting that next question. So it finds that next question for me, and then it's returned it. So that was quick. And then each call, of course, it just goes through and does that. Now there's one other API in here, and it's doing pretty much the exact same kind of thing. That's the posting. So when we answer a question, here's post. And post, again, mapped because it's an HTTP verb. So in Ember, when we answer a question, that button was bound to a JavaScript function that said post this back, and it posts back a trivia answer, and then the trivia answer is, we check if it's valid, and we set the user, and we save it. And that's really it. So now we've got this cool HTTP service, and it works great in our application. We're able to call into it from Ember. Let's call into it from some other stuff. And so we'll take a look at, first of all, Excel. So who here knew that you can write HTML5 applications in Excel? Did anyone know that there used to be a flight simulator Easter egg built into Excel? That's true. That's no longer there, unfortunately. But Excel, if you go to, I think, dev.office.com, it'll tell you all about this. Nobody knows about it, and it's crazy cool. It used to be if you wanted to extend Office, you had to learn about this kind of complicated, I thought, object model. Now, what you do is you basically get a little pane. It's an HTML5 pane. You could put HTML5 video in it. You can put, SVG. You can put simple forms with buttons and stuff. And then you interact between your little frame and the rest, or I guess I'm backwards for you. You interact between your little HTML frame and the document, be it Word or Excel or whatever, using JavaScript. And you use kind of a DOM to do that. So we'll take a look at that. First of all, so this application, I did file new Office project, and I said create a task pane. And then in here, I've got some scripts. So what I want to show off is the, where is that? Office app. Cool. So this is just, this is standard JavaScript. And this is saying when I click a button, then call into update statistics table. Okay? So I'm looking for a button called update statistics, and it's going to run the update statistics table. It's easy for you to say.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's update statistics table. This is that same familiar thing that we just looked at with our web API, right? So this is an HTTP get. It's getting JSON from our API service. No changes at all to the API service. That's the key thing about building services, right? They're reusable. Anyone that talks HTTP can call into them. And then here we do a little bit of formatting the data. We set the rows, and then we say office.select. And that's a key thing about this Office thing is they kind of give you some helper libraries and stuff, JavaScript libraries. But in general, so for instance, what we're doing here is we're coercing. So we're saying we got back some information, we got a grid of data, coerce it into an Office table. And so, yeah, this actually does take, looking at a document or a sample. Fortunately, this whole WebCamp training kit is downloadable, aka.ms, making a plug here, aka.ms/webcamps-training-kit. Right, so this whole sample is in there. I'm going to skip over that
uses
question.
get?
Yes. That is not a RESTful URL. Okay, and what else do I want to show? I guess I do want to show the view. And again, this Office app thing, this is an MVC application, but we're hosting it in that HTML pane. All right? And so we've got, standard HTML, H1s and stuff like that. And remember that we had a button called Update Statistics. So here it is. All right? So now I'm going to kick this off by first launching my API. So I'm going to do debug, start new instance. So this is starting my web app. And this is my full web app running the API. So this is actually loading up the question. And it also has the web API running. So now we're going to load up our Excel chart, or Excel document, I guess it's called. And remember, well, I'm showing you kind of a quick, simple sample. But if you start thinking about this, a lot of times, you've got to build out an admin section of a site to enter a bunch of data in or something, right? But sometimes Excel might not be a bad interface for that. So this actually makes me think of, like, I've had times where I've got like a huge grid of data and I need to get it into a table. And this actually would be pretty easy because it just fires off a bunch of JavaScript events. Okay, so if I go over here, this is kind of funny. Because, like I said, this is, right? This is a full-on browser. And so what do we notice here? Oops. We notice browser link is running. So, okay, so I'm actually going to hit this update statistics. And before I do that, I'm going to kill that browser. What are you doing there? I'm going to, well, I could set a breakpoint, but, okay, who wants a breakpoint? Okay, one person, that's enough. That's enough to make it happen. So I'm going to go into, I believe it was statistics, Office App Controller. No, that's not it. Oh, look what I've done.
Now you're on the spot.
Now I'm on the spot. I think it was Trivia Statistics.
Is it going off script?
It totally is. I'm going to end early. Sorry, guys. No. Okay, so so here I'm going to click on this. Oh, I seriously have killed this application. Let's kill that one. Don't save. I would have been fine if that guy hadn't said he wanted to see the controller, the breakpoint. I'm going to blame someone else. Okay, so this is going to load up. I've killed it. I'm going to restart things. Because I'd stopped this. I stopped my service from running, right? So this is actually, we've got two applications running, a client and a server. So I'm going to minimize that. I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to start up the Excel app. This actually, if I was not goofing around, this would take like 2 seconds. I'm running the
We'll fix this in post-production. We'll just slice it up a little bit.
Okay, last try here. I start that. What's the alarm? Is that the demo fail alarm?
Wow. I like
Okay,
that.
so now I go in here and I'm going to right-click on starting up my Excel app, which is totally going to work now. There it is. Woo! Okay, so I click on Update Statistics. This is a standard button. That fired my Web API controller. It was worth the wait, wasn't it? Okay, so it went in, got my statistics, and it returns OK. This is that thing I was talking about earlier, that there's this new shorthand that you can actually, you can just say return OK. This is the HTTP verb. And this is automatically going to return HTTP, 200 OK, right? My friend John's 200 OK. And so then I hit that, and then this pops into here. And I've actually got, these are my results, right? So this is showing a real-time pie and graph. So now let me go in, and I'm going to answer some questions. What year was the first voice over IP call made? 73, 82, 91, or 94? 94. I think you're wrong. You are wrong, sir. Chicago, someone's going to get this. Chicago is a code name for what Microsoft product? 95. Okay, so we've answered, let's answer a few more wrong. Okay, so now I'm going to hit Update Statistics. That takes a little of the fun out of it. Yeah, so there that is, and there that is. So it's more obvious on the pie chart, right? So, I mean, the thing, yeah, question? Can you push the button? I don't hear.
Version of Office Excel, it's support?
This is Office 2013. So-
only 2013.
Only 2013. This is a big new feature all across Office 2013. So this works in Excel, works in Word, it works in Outlook, even in Outlook Web, and similar format for SharePoint. So yeah, but it's a big new feature. It requires building a browser into the application, right? So it's a big thing. But this is a really crazy cool thing, and actually these applications can be sold. They have a whole Office store. The point of all this is that by building this HTTP API, we're able to leverage those services and get our data and make use of it elsewhere. I'm going to do one more, and this is going to be a Windows Store application. So, Windows Store. All right, so again, this is going to be running our web API, and it's going to be running a Windows Store app. And that Windows Store app, in this case, we built it using JavaScript, using the JavaScript WinJS system, but it could be built using whatever. So this, again, is just going to make a call. I think if I do /API, oops. I'm just going to search through and find this current project and /API. There it is. So here this is in my view model, and it's making a request. I'm not going to dig into the specifics of how you build a Windows Store app. The point is that we're making an HTTP call, and then we're loading it in and binding it and showing the information, right? This is our same unaltered server-side code. So we'll do hopefully a little better this time. Start new instance on the service. Don't close it. And then I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to write, oops, not that guy. And I'll do debug, start new instance on the Windows Store app. So this Windows Store app called into the service, got back our data, standard JSON formatted data, and then we're able to click through and run the application, right? So again, we're just exposing our data. What's really cool too, if you dig through this, is we don't spend a lot of time either on client or server on saying, let's figure out my format or any of that. Because we're standardizing on HTTP as our protocol, we've got those standard HTTP verbs. So, 200 means everything's good. 404 means not found. There's very standard, 201 is created. All these things, these verbs say exactly what happens, so there's nothing new to define on the server or on the client. And this is big because, on the server, we control that. But on the client, this could be an iOS app. This could be, running on a Raspberry Pi, whatever it is. Anything that speaks HTTP works pretty well with Web API because it's standard HTTP stuff. All right? So now I'm going to drag this to the bottom. Here's a little trick, by the way. If you drag these to the bottom to close it, and you just drop it, it actually hangs around for a bit and it's like collected. But if you hold it there for a while, then it's actually like force closed. I like doing that. It flips, and that's like you are gone, buddy. Okay. So we just ran through a lot of stuff. And come on now, it's just not cool.
It's getting late.
I can do that. There we go. Once I get back here. All right, so we did file new web API. We looked at the Geek Quiz services. So this was, on the server side. We looked at consuming in client applications, both Excel and Windows Store. And again, the idea, just driving it home, this means consume it anywhere. You can, including unit tests, including one server talking to another server to get data, which is storing it in a database, which is whatever. Machines like to talk in these machine-friendly formats. That's it. So I actually am a little bit early. I should have failed that demo a few more times. We've got time for questions.
Any questions? Online? In
There you
person?
are.
I blinked briefly when you did the NuGet management. What was the exact name of the NuGet package you got for the web API?
Excellent
To
question. The
web
NuGet
voice?
packages.
There's a lot of them there.
Yeah, let me show you. It's Web API Test Client, and there's a
There was
cool.
one before that as well, I think. Or was already included when you had the checkbox selected for the web API you needed?
Yeah,
Okay.
when I did File New Project Web API, that's what gave me the help page. And the help page is what kind of digs through, it finds all my API controllers, it finds out what methods they support, and builds out that help page. But then to go that step further and get that test client, that's, and so if I do, let me see, Web API test client. I want to show you this for a few reasons. One is there's a blog post that tells you a little bit more about what it's doing. And so this is the guy that built it, Yao, who is a super genius. And it's out on NuGet, and it's also, the code is up on GitHub, and he's building new stuff onto it. But, was that just me talking real loud, or did someone say something? That was just me talking loud, sorry guys. One other thing I want to show, let me see, I think it would be in here. So you could go in and change that test client, and people have submitted some pull requests to do some cool stuff. The way that help page is implemented is using another cool MVC feature that we didn't talk about earlier, but somebody asked about during the break. So here it is. It's the concept of areas. So somebody said, how do I work if I've got somebody on my team wants to build the store part of my site, and someone's building the admin side, and maybe we're bringing in something that an open source person built somewhere else. And so the idea is you use areas. So any MVC application, you can say right-click, add area, and then that area is put in a separate folder, and there's separate routes associated with it. And so, yeah, definitely I will. So here's this. Okay, so it says areas help page, and then this help page is its own kind of small self-contained MVC application. All right, so it's got its own stuff for routing, it's got models and views. The reason I'm showing you this is because you can go in and customize things, right? So you can go in and you could say, I would like to change my API documentation. Again, the hope is that some people might actually use this, maybe even just internally inside your company, to say this is how our API works. And you can go in and change this. You could put your company's branding on there, or you could put some kind of disclaimers or links for more information. And actually, this is how Yao implemented this test client. Is he went in and his code installs a couple of classes, and then it puts in this stuff here, this display for model, these two display for model things, and that's what wires up his whole test client thing. So the point again of going through all this is to make sure that you know that you can go in and you can change anything about how that API help page works, including these are display templates. And this means you can go in and you could say, anytime something's invalid, or, just all kinds of stuff. You can go in and modify how those things work. Great question. Any other questions? Yes.
Okay. In your web API, if you define a controller to be asynchronous, if you use HTTP client, like previous version, we still use like post as JSON as sync. Do we still use that?
Yeah, the idea with good question. So the idea with the async service is that the work done on the server is asynchronous, right. But it doesn't have any effect on the client calling into it. So what that means to it is, if I've got a server and it's got 20 threads, and I've got 400 people pinging the same URL, and each of those API calls requires a 5-second database lookup. What this allows it to do is those first 5 go in, start doing the database lookup. While that's happening, we can free up those controller threads, and we say we're not doing anything useful now. Just kind of bookmark those, and then we can pass those on and start chewing through some of the other requests. So that async thing is purely a server-side convenience. It has nothing to do with the client.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay.
Cool.
Got
Yeah.
2 questions. The other one is a security on the web API Is there any way to simplify, like putting the headers, like basic authentication in the headers? And
Yes, indeed. So the question is, how do we do? I guess I don't have to repeat since he's got a microphone. But yeah, we want to talk about security for that. So I'm going to point you to my favorite site, ASP.NET site, and then I go web-API. And if we look in here, there's actually a whole section on security. And there's examples here: basic, forms, integrated Windows auth, working with SSL, all kinds of stuff. So those are a lot of things that'll get you started. And it's built so that it's very extensible. So if you get to something where you want to do something really pretty advanced with authentication, if we go, there's a thing called ThinkTexture Identity Model. And this is built by two MVPs. Let me see. I think I want this guy here. So this is built by some MVPs, and they've built out a lot more stuff. So things like all kinds of stuff, SAML and just crazy stuff. Stuff I want, WS Trust. And so anyhow, if you have complex security needs for MVC or Web API, I recommend ThinkTexture. These guys are on the Web API Advisors Board, and so they collaborate a lot with them. As an example, Web API 2 and MVC, Web API 2 included Core's cross-origin resource sharing as a feature, which means that I can call into another domain and call a Web API and get data back, which is normally blocked by the browser. But there's a protocol for doing that if you pass the right headers, and this whole thing, and it's complicated. So these guys had built out code to do that, and they worked with the MVC or the Web API team, and they submitted that. You guys know that MVC, Web API, and a lot of the ASP.NET stack are open source, right? Did you know that? So these guys submitted their open source code, and we said, great, and we included it, and we shipped it out. So Cores was included as a feature which was contributed by somebody in the community, tested by Microsoft, supported by Microsoft, and all that, but, you know, open source code. Well, we have a couple minutes. Let me just make sure you do know that. So if I go to ASP.NET Web Stack.codeplex.com. So this is the source code for ASP.NET. There's a very few things that don't fit in here, partly because they're like bundled deeply into the system and stuff. But the majority, pretty much everything in Web API and MVC and stuff, if we go into the source, it is right here. And so you can dig through the source. You can look at their unit tests and stuff. What's cooler is, let's take a look at the history. So here today, we can see that Ryan made a pretty big fix. Good job, Ryan. So we can go through and we can see the check-ins as they're happening. Here's Yishai. He is a dev lead on the MVC team. But you can see these are the changes that are not, released yet, but these will be in the next release. You can watch them as they're coding, right? So this is completely working in the open. This is not the old ASP.NET when wonder what they're going to build. Like, you can watch them as they're doing it. So that's pretty cool. So anyhow, total side note, but the whole thing of, it's open source, we're taking open source contributions from the community, that's part of how they're moving so quickly lately. Question? I can't hear you. You have to hold it in.
I hope.
Maybe try the one beside you.
Can someone relay the question? Somebody else has keyed there. See, I don't know if multiple can go at a time.
This API connects to a database. I have a question. What is the connection string to the database stored? And if I want to tweak the SQL statement behind, how can I see the SQL statements and tweak them?
Okay, so to make sure I understand, you're wondering if the data is stored in the database, you want to see the SQL statement and all that behind it.
Yes, and the connection, what is the connection to the database?
Okay, so they're actually two completely separate things. In this case, I used a scaffolded MVC or a Web API controller that's using Entity Framework code first. So that's storing in the database. I can show you that real quick, but it's not something that's completely specific to Web API. So here's the context. If we can see that this is using person context is the name. So there we go, person context. So that's actually in web config is where this connection string is held. And actually, we're slightly over, but the simplest way to see this is actually to use, what's that called? Where you watch kind of the black box.
You want to when you're using Entity Framework, right? You're basically giving it control to generate your SQL statements, and there are options for you to optimize and customize them. But if you want to see what they're generating, I'd recommend installing the SQL management tools, and from there you can launch the SQL profiler, and then you can watch the statements as they're coming through, and then grab them and work with them. Would that do it?
One other thing is IntelliTrace. People know about IntelliTrace. Again, this is I think it's Ultimate, maybe Professional, but this actually is like a black box, and so this will tell you everything about what's happening. So for instance, I'll do this real quick. I'll go in. I will make a request. Okay, so we'll say get. There, it's doing that. Okay, so now if I say break all, IntelliTrace. Oh dear. I think what I need to do is go in. Well, I could debug it also. But IntelliTrace will actually show you all your steps as you're going. So it's really pretty insane. Like you can go back in time and you can see, okay, for this request, earlier on in the request, there was a database call, and this is the SQL string that was executed. So let me try that real quick, just in here. I'll do this one more time. That's weird. Yeah. Yeah. So anyhow, that's IntelliTrace is something more to look into.